from Broadcasting House there in Drumnadrochit.
Right. Yes, indeed. The propaganda hut, I like to call it, because propaganda is getting used against us all the time, Gordon. I think it's time we've used our own back at the Westminster establishment.
Well, that's it, Nori. I mean, the whole reason you and I have to be here in the first place is because we don't hear anything but propaganda, and our poor viewers are subjected to it daily, 24 hours a day. But certainly on the news in the last 24 hours, there have been a number of things happening coincidentally, but seem a little bit odd timing-wise. So we all know that Nicola Sturgeon is now basically been let off, I think you could say, by Police Scotland, and she's no longer going to be the subject of Operation Branchform. And even more strange, I think, is that Colin Beattie, who was the treasurer of the SNP, has also been largely let off the hook as well. And that simply leaves Peter Murrell. Now, as far as I could see yesterday, there was one report that Mr. Murrell had been charged with embezzlement, and then it disappeared. Has he been charged with embezzlement, do you think?
Here's what I think, Gordon, for what it's worth. Why are we talking about Nicola Sturgeon this morning? Why are we talking about this? May I posit a suggestion that the declaration from Salvo to the UN has got the ears of Westminster, and it's got the ears of everybody. Because even this morning, I can tell you, Gordon, that there's people in Canada are now tuning in to the podcast, wondering what the hell's going on. So if we're reaching Canada, and you said we've got people in America, there's a lot of interest in this because it's the people that's taking this, not a political party. Now, what I'm positing here this morning is we're talking about Nicola Sturgeon. Where did this come from all of a sudden? We're not expecting this, were we? But here we are talking about it. Well, we're not talking about the UN and decolonization of Scotland. And another thing, this is just another thing. We got football in the telly last night.
Yeah, that was odd, wasn't it?
It was very odd. All of a sudden, we were getting a full array of Scottish people talking about Scottish football beaming to us on a free-per-view BBC. There's something going on here to counteract the UN story, Gordon.
I think we can safely say that. Yeah, we can safely say that we never get to see any Scottish national football team playing any international games for free. We always end up having to pay for it, unlike England, which gets, full spread coverage with the BBC and ITV, and they get theirs for free. Suddenly we get it for free. As soon as Nicola Sturgeon is out of the picture, Colin Beattie's out of the picture, Peter Murrell appears at least to have been charged with embezzlement. Everything's hunky-dory in the world of the United Kingdom. And so they very graciously give us permission to watch our own football team playing a game live.
Yeah. But again, we've got to be careful we don't get caught up in this political bubble that is Holyrood and Westminster. By the way, yesterday there was a significant event. I'll just mention this in the passing. It came to me as I was broadcasting Caledon Radio yesterday in the House of Lords, and they were given some kind of speech. It was quite empty, but all these papers were dropped on top of them, and they were wondering what the hell's going on. And there was people in the gallery saying, "People, not lords." And I just thought, is this the start of a revolution, Gordon? Because that was televised, but now it's been hushed out. Nobody's talking about it. But that was significant. People got into the House of Lords.
Well, as far as I remember, the House of Lords and the House of Commons do have public galleries, and you can go. Yeah, you're searched. But I mean, carrying papers with anything written on it isn't really an offence. And throwing them, from the gallery onto the assembled lords and ladies.
It's not an offence, Gordon. It's not an offence.
Yeah, no, it's not
an offence. But it's a statement. It's a statement. Because all these people that are now getting put into the House of Lords on £300 a day, the place can't hold all these people. But yet if they turn up and sign in and go away again, they get £300. Everybody's getting sick, fed up because, what was it, Liz Kendall, cuts to disability allowances, the winter fuel loss, WASPy women not getting their recompense. Yet they're putting people in there to affect change that controls us. The people have had enough.
Yeah.
People are starting to turn. Has the revolution started, Gordon? That's what I want to know.
I believe that all the people who were involved in this demonstration were actually angry Labour voters who were absolutely dumbfounded that Starmer would go ahead and do what the Tories planned to do all along, which was to cut benefits and increase spending on defence, when supposedly there isn't the money to support the most vulnerable in society, but we can find billions to support armed forces and nuclear weapons and, basically building up the United Kingdom's defensive posture yet again after decades of cuts. I mean, okay, the Ukrainian war with Russia has certainly sharpened people's perceptions of the risks of possible military threats to the UK, but they're still extremely distant and incredibly unlikely. And anyway, we're largely weak in defence at the moment anyway, and we have been for the last 50 or 60 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you know this? Politics is in turmoil right now. BlackRock, etc., are now controlling political parties. We've seen this. We've seen the real political leaders, like Jeremy Corbyn, even Michael Foot back in the day, from the left coming in, getting squashed out. And now what we've got is these warmongers libertarians. Now, if anyone wants to get up to speed on this, I had David Powell on yesterday on Caledon Radio. It'll be up on the website. What he's forecasting, what he's telling is frightening, Gordon, about the swathe of cuts. And I'll remind people what libertarian is. It's if you can't afford it, you don't deserve it. So if you don't earn enough money to buy the goods, you don't deserve to have them, right? So if you're disabled and you can't work, you don't deserve it. It's as brutal as that. And what we're seeing is Liz Kendall going through all the TV studios talking like a demented school teacher to kids about how right this is to claw back on the money that's being wasted on these scroungers. They're disabled. Yep. They're disabled, Gordon. And, women, they're being cheated. People are getting cold.
I was reading the column of wee ginger dog Paul Kavanagh-Mawson, who you probably know had a major stroke some years ago, and is profoundly disabled, unable to do any meaningful work other than a little bit of writing from home, and he's being forced to go through yet another reassessment of his claim for benefits. And as he pointed out, it's as if the Department for Work and Pensions thinks that the bit of his brain that was destroyed by the stroke years ago is magically going to regrow, and he's somehow miraculously going to be able to go back to work. It's just not happening, and it's demeaning and it's embarrassing and humiliating to put people through this simply to get a pittance of money, and it is a pittance. It's well below anything anyone in Europe would get in order just to get this pittance, basically enough money to barely subsist. And he's having to go through that to get it. It's pathetic. I agree, completely pathetic.
Gordon, it's only going to be people, the strongest who will survive these kind of politics. And I really worry about people who are infirm not getting the money they need. Yeah. Mental health was said to be, West Eating says, it's blown out of proportion. If you're stuck in a house in a wheelchair and you can't move and there's no nurse coming in to see you and you're stuck in that prison because the house then becomes a prison for you, how do you think your mental health's going to go? It's going to go down, isn't it? School kids are looking at their options for work later on. My daughter's with them. She's 17. She's Dad, I don't even know what to do. If I don't get my maths, what do I do? I'm on the scrap heap. But the only information or education I can give to her is, Gordon, you haven't got a job for life anymore. You'll have to reinvent yourself as you go through life now, because the big factory from cradle to grave is not the place you can go anymore. You've got to eke out a living here and there and everywhere.
There are almost no manufacturing jobs left that people can do. It's all been automated and robotized, And even the manufacturing that we did have in Scotland is migrating south of the border. The companies which moved here and set up here are now moving back to England, where there are better tax breaks, presumably, where they're being offered inducements to go back there. Grangemouth closing, as we all know, we're producing, billions of barrels of oil every year, but we can't even refine it ourselves, etc., etc. These are, we all know, well-known signs of colonization. But I thought it was interesting in the last 10 days that Kenny McCaskill, in his campaigning to become the new leader of Alba, has acknowledged publicly for the first time that Scotland is in fact a colony, and he's mentioned this specifically using that word. And the issue of decolonisation, which has largely been the domain of people like you and I, has now gradually started to migrate into the public sphere, and we've got the first mainstream politicians starting to acknowledge it. And I'm hoping that this is the start of many politicians beginning to acknowledge it. And we're beginning to hear this word colonisation, Scotland as a colony being decolonised, now becoming part and parcel of everyday conversations between Scots. And that is the way it should be.
Well, a couple of years ago, Gordon, I was listening to a debate in the House of Commons, and David Mundell, who was I think he was Scottish Secretary of State, I think at that point, it was dismissing the fact that Scotland was a colony. 2 years ago, he was dissing it. So they knew back then, they had an argument that Scotland, how dare Scotland be called that, and he just dismissed it without any argument, without any debate, just in an ordinary chamber discussion. And I thought, he's just mentioned colony.
Do you remember what he actually said? He actually said that Scotland in 1707 had been expunged from existence. It had actually pretty much been abolished. That was what he was implying. But expunged? No, it was never expunged. And as a part of the Treaty of Union, both England and Scotland remained in perpetuity as individual kingdoms. It's just that England added the Scottish kingdom to their crown and proceeded as though that was a done deal.
But my point was, Gordon, you mentioned Kenny McCaskill coming to the fore, a first political voice on this side. But we know that 2 years ago, David Mundell knew that there was going to be some kind of backlash to this. He was trying to play it down. He was in his last throes as a Tory government, so he knew it wouldn't come to pass when he was in power. But now where we are now, we can see, and we must appreciate, Gordon, that these people down south know about this UN colonisation committee that we're going to see. They know about it. Mark my words. And it's heartening to see Kenny McCaskill. Listen, choices he got when he's got the proof in front of him. You can't hide it. You can't run away from it anymore, Gordon. And anyone that does is playing stupid. But Kenny McCaskill's playing smart. He knows there's a big movement going on, and he knows he has to get behind it. And I think it's going to be the small stone in the dike that crumbles, and then the whole dike will crumble. Because if he gets on mainstream media and starts talking about this, we won it. Because it gets into the hearts and minds of people. What's colonisation? For people who don't know what that means, they will now try their best to come up to speed on it.
Well, because the UK now knows that Salvo's petition is actually in the hands of the Secretary General of the United Nations in New York, they can't take that back now. So from what I've been hearing from back channels recently, the British state has been, or the British media, I should say, to be more correct, has been looking for dirt on the NGO which has been tasked with actually representing Scotland's case at the UN. They're trying to find out if there's any way they can undermine this Justice for All International Organisation in Geneva, and they haven't, as far as I know, found anything at all that they can use against them. And it might well be that they never will, because they're trying to find dirt on essentially a legal firm, and a legal firm is never going to allow that, especially not an international organisation. like the one concerned in Geneva. They're going to be watertight, but also they can ignore it because the UK doesn't have any jurisdiction in the EU
Right.
whatsoever.
Correct. I know. This is the brilliant thing about it. You cannot get near it. You are not part of this just now. We are talking to a third party. Your time will come when you're asked to sit in front of the committee, here, Starmer, and tell the committee that Scotland isn't a colony. And then we will laugh at you, and then we will take our country back. These are good times, Gordon, but we must stay focused on this and focused on the backlash that we might receive. Now, it's psychological, right? It's this psychological ploy that we've got to be careful about. The stuff that doesn't affect us physically, but mentally, it can creep in without us knowing. And one of the things we identified at the start of this broadcast was the football culture is going to be planted on us to placate us, to soften us. But the problem I was speaking to David Powell about this yesterday, has this libertarian model, has it got a shelf life? Will it drop off? Will it stop building houses when there's no land to keep building them? Will it stop putting wind turbines when there's no land left to put them on? In other words, when Scotland is a desert, we have to be careful that we see all this happening around us. And if we don't get to the UN double quick, more and more of this will happen. It's like two sides, Gordon. You can see utopia. You can see the green fields of liberation over there. And right in front of our houses, we can see the nasty, murky liberation happening in front of us. So there's a choice. Scotland, do you want to see more of your land taken over, or do you want to see your land taken back? That's the big choice we've got this weekend, and what we've got people to think about this weekend, going into next week. Never mind the minutiae of is Nicola Sturgeon guilty or not guilty. Deflection. That's a deflection. Big issue is, where are we going?
Yeah, I agree that there is one remaining hangover, I think, from the Nicola Sturgeon era, which was pointed out online recently, and that is that the mainstream media has given Nicola Sturgeon a very easy ride and an easy off ramp by just basically the British state just lets her off. Police Scotland, the Crown Prosecution Service of England, and the Procurator Fiscal Service in Scotland no longer interested in her. Everything's over. Nicola Sturgeon can go about her business quite happily and relax. But she can't, because Alex Salmond's trial case, the investigation into that, is coming up in May. And Nicola Sturgeon is not going to be given an easy ride there. Remember that she couldn't recall specifics of the Alex Salmond trial case and her involvement in it. Right. And then she magically managed to recall enough to write it in her memoirs. So I think by the time this this investigation, this court case, in fact, in support of Alex Salmond, actually happens in May, I think finally the truth will come out, but she's not going to get an easy time of it. And I just want to sort of draw a line under that there, and leave that, because it is now history, but there's going to be a bit more of it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely, Gordon. But we're always going to be deflected at crucial points in our quest for liberation for our country. There's always going to be these hurdles put in our way, and they're psychological. They're drawing us away from the real issue here. And the big talking point across Canada, even Germany, Ireland, is Scotland going to the UN. Switzerland, where this NGO are based, are now telling their people they're going to papers. We've got there's something in a national paper in America, the Morning Star, putting stuff out.
It's in the National as well yesterday.
The National. We've had Sarah going on doing other bits and pieces. She's been on Caledon Radio for the last 2 years doing this, so it's building up a head of steam. Of steam, Gordon. And that is where the big game is. That is where the big game is. And never mind the party politics, like about the Tories shouting down Labour and Labour shouting down the SNP. Just a facade. It's a facade.
Well, the thing is, that kind of politics is now completely irrelevant, because none of the politicians in Holyrood have any power. Nicola Sturgeon did us one favour, and at the time I didn't see it. When she referred the issue of Holyrood legislating for a referendum to the English Supreme Court, She did that knowing that they would reject it and would say that Holyrood cannot ever hold a referendum without permission from London. Now that that's firmly established in people's minds, I think a lot of us thought that was the end of the road, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's the end of the road for Holyrood. Holyrood is now reached as far as it can go as far as independence cause is concerned, and it has to be abandoned now, which means that whatever happens in 2026 to the SNP is irrelevant because we now have the People's Movement and it is now taking action in the UN. And there's no way that any politicians from either Holyrood or London can take that back. It's out of their control now, and they are now unable to stop it.
The only way you're going to get people involved with this, Gordon, is if they leave political parties and come over to the people's side. If you're in the SNP and you come to a rally, a UN rally, I wouldn't trust them as far as I can throw them. What are you doing with your party colours up a people's movement like this? No, leave your party colours at the door. No, so the Kenny McCaskills and the people, that's all very good because we'll need the political parties to follow the people. But be a people, then be a party person after it, not party before country. It can't happen like that, Gordon. We've had that for too long. You've got to be with the people, not the party.
Sarah Sellers, in her most recent interview on Through a Scottish Prism, said something interesting, which I think is important. The next step, in fact, the next big event is going to be when enough of the people of Scotland support Salvo and its international efforts at the UN that suddenly the politicians stick their fingers up in the wind and they begin to figure out which way the wind of change is blowing. And at that moment, the politicians will start to get on board. And at that point, everything will change because the SNP, ALPA, we also know, incidentally, that the Independence for Scotland party under Colette Walker has already endorsed this plan, the Salvo plan. So ISP is already on board. It only will take ALPA under Kenny McCaskill or whoever becomes the leader and the SNP to jump on board. And this bus is then moving again, and it's moving with everybody on board. And instead of the politicians consigning themselves to the dustbin of history by staying with the UK and with Holyrood, they're now moving with the people towards full liberation. And that means that there will be a Scottish Parliament which will have all those powers after independence, and we can bring back all of our territories, all of our resources back under our own control, and all of the deals that the UK, and I would include the deals which Kate Forbes has signed, the SEZs, the special economic zones, the free ports, all of that will simply be washed away because it was under another jurisdiction. It was under a UK jurisdiction. Once that's gone, all of those contracts are worthless and everything will change.
Yeah, because over in Africa right now, I think it's in Mali, they've chased out, given 12 hours for the Chinese to get out of their country. They've rewritten the rule books and the laws have been taken back. They've given up French control. They've said, no, it's our country now. We're taking it back. And this is on the back of other countries in Africa really want to get rid of their chains of colonialism. This is their words. And we're in the same kind of boat as them. But what they're doing is being very, very hands-on, drastic. We're creating new laws. We're getting the people behind this new parties because the parties are made up from people coming into the parties, not big conglomerates that are running them. So they've been chased out, and now they've come to the brick, Gordon, where they've chased these Chinese mercenaries out of their diamond mines, and they've taken them back. They've got rid of them. Now, China is a massive country. You can imagine there might be a backlash to that. These people aren't caring. It can't be as bad as what it once was. Come and take us. What have we got left? We raped and raided of us, you know. So we've got influence and experience from other countries. What we've got to do, Gordon, in Scotland, our country, the best country in the world as far as I'm concerned, what we've got to do, we've got to get out in the streets this summer and march for our right to be seen by the UN. We've got to get the NGO over here in Scotland in a big march and rally in Glasgow or Edinburgh, and give him a microphone and tell us and outline what he's going to do.
That would be good.
Then he can get the feeling of the Scottish people that you cannot get in a bit of paper or a document. You can touch, you can sense, you can smell the people's anxiety, their desperation, their enthusiasm for something different. And if you can that and bottle it and then take it to the UN, my God, there's no stopping us. Because that is when the world looks at us and goes, Scotland's a colony, all right.
It's interesting you should mention the idea of inviting the NGO to send their representative to Scotland to speak to us, because I think many Scots are sceptical about Salvo's attempt to get petition to the UN. And it's one of those seeing is believing things. People are reluctant to believe something until they hear it from the horse's mouth. And so if Salvo can persuade the NGO to send their representative to Scotland to speak to us in a public forum, that would be huge, because it will show everybody here in Scotland that this is real. It's not just talking about it. It's not something that's happening hundreds of miles away or thousands of miles away in the UN. This is actually our representative coming here from Geneva to talk to us about what they're doing on our behalf, how it's going to happen. Even if they can't give us chapter and verse and exact dates, at least we know that it is happening and there will be progress reports. And I know Salvo is planning to issue news reports on updates every month or so, roughly. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what I've heard, but roughly that sort of timescale to keep us up to date. But it would be great if we had one of the NGO's senior legal figures over here to tell us how this will work and what to expect.
Well, the thing is, Gordon, we've got our part to play as the people of Scotland. We have to get, I don't know, maybe Salvo groups, more and more of them. And if you haven't signed up to Salvo, I know what you're waiting for. Get notified of what's happening in your area. There's one here from the Droghett in the Highlands and Islands. And I've met like-minded people who are now part of Salvo. If you haven't joined, go to salvo.scot, go to liberation.scot, see what the fuss is about. Now, anyone in the world can go to these sites, but it'd be better for Scots to sign up. Us Scots have got to take over. And we've got to get out in the streets. And we've got to push our disabled people, friends, in their wheelchairs. We've got to get our old folks out. We've got to get our young people engaged as well. We've got to get Spirit, Gordon, of 2014 back. We've got to get our mojo back for this, because we can see something. The stars are aligning here. And we are lucky and privileged to be living part of this history. We can't look up future generations. We've got to do it ourselves. And we've got to get out in the streets. And that means we've got to get all under one banner. We've got to get all these good people who know how to run campaigns and put all the crap behind us and say, can you get this done for us? And we've got to have banners, Gordon. No free ports, no SEZs. Scotland wants to be free, not a desert. More messages, not independence when you want it. Now, get that in. Get that gone. We've got to be succinct in our messaging. Because here's the deal, Gordon. I'm reading a book on propaganda right now. And it is fascinating how the elites control the masses. The masses want to be controlled. That's the first thing. They want to be controlled because they can't make big decisions on big things. So they let others do it for them. And when they do that, they cede all responsibility to the 1%. The 1% abuse everybody else. Now, here's a story, Gordon, that you should know about, because you drive quite a lot, right? In 1938, when motor cars in the northwest of America were taking over the horse and cart, they started going on these roads, and it was a new mode of transport. This was marvelous. But these cars were too perfect, breaking down. There was no industry for repairs and of such like. So they started working on ideas. What could slow down or assert the driver and make him go into a garage, like the stagecoaches had to do, So we're thinking, how do you make money off this repair work? They started putting drains in the middle of the road. And we've got them ever since. And nobody has ever said, why have we got drains in the middle of our road? Why aren't they down at the end of the camber where the water runs off and they can be collected? The drains are there to make your car a bit more worn out. So you'll have to go to a garage. You'll have to build back up again, more spares. By the way, you'll be paying road tax in this as well, by the way, for all this. And here we are in 2025. I can go to Inverness and there's drains all over the place. And I'm laughing to myself and I'm thinking, we've been caught, Bonnie. We don't even know what's around us that is usurping us and making us pour money into the coffers of the 1%. We just don't know, Gordon. And that's just one thing that happens to us. One thing I've read about.
Not only that, but I mean, if you take a really broad brush look at global politics at the moment, the whole world is in uproar. It's not just because of the Ukrainian war, it's because the engines of neoliberalism are running out of fuel. There are not enough poor people left to exploit. And so the only way they can exploit them is to make those who are already poor a lot poorer, or create some new classification of working poor people by taxing them harder or, reducing their pay. But the other thing that's happening, which I think is interesting, is that there's a huge backlash to this. And countries themselves are beginning to realize that they shouldn't be letting these corporations decide what their national policies are anymore. That they should just stop doing that. Take back control of these resources. Start, instead of just licensing companies to do what they like, actually taxing them on the profits they make from those resources, and taking back full control of their countries. And this has become a thing now, that there are more countries looking for liberation now than probably there has ever been, because everybody is trying to protect themselves against this rapacious neoliberalism, which is looking for new victims constantly to impoverish. And nobody wants to be impoverished. People want their resources. They want to have the benefits that they should have, like from their oil, from their gas, from their wind energy, from whatever other things they have, their gold deposits, their lithium deposits, their coal, whatever it is. They're not getting it. And so I think neoliberalism is fighting against these people's movements, and the people's movements are gradually solidifying and growing larger and larger. And so more and more countries are pulling out of these international organizations as a result. They don't want any part of globalization.
Well, Alf Baird recognises this in his book Doon Hodden. He says the course of post-colonial theory sees us coming to this output at the end, when the political parties have been spent, and the people now they just cannot take any more of this burden. Taxes, no benefits, money going out, but less money coming in. It's unsustainable. And when people's health, people's relatives start dying, Gordon, it's almost like a war. You're getting rid of those that can't fend for themselves. You're getting rid of people. You're killing people. When that becomes unbearable. And here's the other thing about this you've got to remember is Keir Starmer is a guy who sits at the top of this political table, and he's now justifying Israel's actions and killing babies, children, women, you name it. And we're all getting appalled at this. And every time we see this, and we shouldn't really normalise this in any fashion. I don't think we do, but it does sit in our psyche, and we get angry at this, and then we get angry at what's happening to us, and then we find we've got the same problems of there's Palestinian people. We've got the same problems with these African people. We have to do it ourselves. We have to get together as peoples and move on. There's a great question coming, Gordon, if I can mention this one before I move on. John Fenton says, he's watching the show, he says, if a rep from the NGO addressed Holyrood, the mainstream media wouldn't be able to ignore it, but I don't see it happening. I think John misses the point about it's a people-led organisation that this NGO is working with, not a parliament anymore. They don't have to go to the Scottish Parliament, John. And that's for exactly the reason he states. The mainstream media wouldn't report it.
Well, there is one. There is one potential benefit to John's suggestion, which is that if the NGO made a public speech in Holyrood, if he was allowed to do that, then every politician that's employed in Holyrood would have to hear it, and it would be impossible for them not to know about it. And then those politicians could be challenged. Well, what's your reaction? What are you going to do now that you know this? Because you can no longer deny that you've heard anything about it because it's been made public in your parliament where you were sitting. It's going to be impossible for them to dodge any kind of response to it.
Yeah, Gordon, I would posit again. I think the SNP know all about this. They know about colonisation and the UN. They know where Scotland's going. And it's only going to be a matter of time when they can collect their thoughts and try and process this into their own political advantage that they'll come out. And there's Kenny McCaskill. I'll be behind this campaign if you vote for me. Well, it's not about that, Kenny. It's not about political parties. It's about the people. The sooner you get that into your head, the better.
Well, you know that Alf Baird summed it up really well when he said that what will happen is when the politicians realise the way things are going, they'll jump on the bandwagon, but then they'll also try to make it sound like it was their idea all along.
Yeah.
That they were the first people to think about it and do it, and therefore that's great, and you should vote for them. And that's the way political parties work. They watch
right.
to see what way the wind's blowing, and they look at what people seem to be wanting, and then they try and figure out a way of saying that they're going to provide it. And that's politicians the world over, you know. But it just depends on whether you trust them or not.
Yeah, I don't trust politicians of any hue or colour anymore, Gordon. I've lived through 2014. I gave my trust and my faith to a party in 2015. I'm now at 2025, and I'm scunnered. I'm beaten. Do you know? Can I mention something else that came just as we were speaking, Gordon? The Flamingo Land bid is back again. And this is what we're up against. If we got our independence back, we could just say, get lost. 10 years we've been fighting against Loch Lomond, Flamingo Land, trying to take it. 10 years, Gordon. And they're coming back for more. And it's the deep, deep pockets of these companies that are wearing us out. They're using their pockets to wear us all out. And we've got to be ready for the last big struggle. And it's not about libertarianism. It's about the UN. It's about colonisation. We've got to get air in our lungs, our muscles working again, our heads thinking, and get to the streets and talk to people, local communities, and sign up for the newsletters from Salvo and Liberation.Scot. It's the only game in town.
Well, there was a commentator that I watch regularly on YouTube who commentates on the war in Ukraine. And he was pointing out something about Russian people. And he said, generally speaking, the West had assumed that at a certain point, if enough Russian soldiers had died in this pointless war in Ukraine, eventually the people in Russia would rise up and, you know, storm the palace and get rid of Putin and murder all his family or whatever. And they didn't. And so the only conclusion they could draw from that is that the entire population of Russia is essentially docile. It's inactive. It won't take any action. It will just allow its government to do whatever it wants and not rise against and not take any risks. And I know it's an extreme example because Russia is particularly brutal in putting down rebellions, but it also very neatly describes the population here as well. We're largely docile. We're largely easily distracted by things like football matches and little snippets of news that attract our attention for a few days and take our eyes off the main problems that we face. And that is a technique that the UK is expert at doing. Bread and circuses, as somebody once said. You provide bread and circuses, people will allow your government to do whatever they want. In this case, I think we've run out of bread and circuses. People are no longer fooled by things like being able to watch football for free, you know, or having all of these interesting political sort of mini dramas to talk about, you know, over the kitchen table. It's not about that anymore. It's moved away from that. It's moved to New York for a start, to the UN, and it's Geneva, it's Brussels, it's people outside of the UK who are now helping Scotland to establish that it has its right intact to vote on ending the union, and it always has had that right. And as soon as we get a ruling about that, there's no way the United Kingdom can take that back. It's not possible. You can't sweep that under the carpet because it's out there in the rest of the world.
Well, one of the things, Gordon, Caledon Radio do this all the time, is promote our culture. And if we can get, because culture's an easy thing to get into. You can turn on the radio and you can look at your window and you can see the hills, or you can hear an accent, or you can hear a language. It's all around us. We can tap into that and bring it back to ourselves and not be ashamed, not cringeworthy about a set of bagpipes. I speak to a musician not that long ago. I speak to a lot of them. And he was saying, do you know this, Norris? When you hear bagpipes, you hear the dead. You hear the dead soldiers. And I thought, I've never listened to bagpipes like that before, you know what I mean? But in his mind, he was paying tribute when he hears a pipe band. He goes back to the Second World War and these young men that went to their deaths, the Falkland War, pipes always leading the way, a war instrument. But again, he said, no, it's a peace instrument. This is playing homage to those people that have died. And when you hear bagpipes, they're Scotland's. Nobody else's, Gordon, they're Scotland. There's Uilleann pipes and there's all kinds of different pipes, but ours are Highland pipes, bagpipes. And when you hear them, when that puts up the hairs in the back of your neck up, you know that your culture's back. And do not ever be ashamed of that, because that is what connects us to our forefathers, our grandfathers, our country. And if we all get behind that and get our culture back, if we talk the way that we want to talk, you know, geez, that halfway. I heard somebody saying halfway who's, you know, speak like that. Don't be ashamed of it. And what I'm really annoyed about, and maybe one of the things Scotland should do, the Scottish government should build in a Scots language act so that in universities it's spoken in Scots to the students. In the banks, in the hospitals, everybody's speaking Scots. It's a right to speak it. You shouldn't be lambasted for trying to speak this way because it doesn't fit a textbook or it doesn't fit a colonised neighbour of yours to speak like that. Nah, take it all back, folks. Come on. This is the only way. If we can grab our culture, Gordon, we've got our country.
We've been taught, you know, eventually our culture is going to be subsumed into this multinational ethnic mix of, you know, McDonald's and fast food outlets and huge clothing brands and all the rest of it. For me, living in a city like Glasgow, where I'm surrounded by all of these British and American corporations that are doing business here, it's actually hard to remember that you live in Scotland at all. And so, you know, when you hear the bagpipes, as you say, you're reminded of where you are and what you are and who you are and what your history is. And that does, as you say, raise the hackles in the back of your neck. It makes you feel emotional. And that's that emotional connection that's essential to any culture. Without it, you're nobody. You're a sort of citizen of nowhere. You're just a consumer, another consumer of international brands like everybody else on the planet. Although there's nothing wrong with these international brands, the countries where they put their roots down don't have to accept this American culture as their own. We don't have to adopt it just because it's American. We've always, I mean, I grew up in the 70s where we envied American kids constantly. I used to see American comics and looking at the things American kids had access to. You could get a mini submarine for a certain number of tokens for selling comics. You know, you could buy a gun, you know, things that people in Scotland never get access to. You know, you could buy your own small motorbike in America when you were a child. None of that was possible here. We didn't have the freedoms, we didn't have the money, and we still don't. Our culture is just not that rich, really. It's poor.
Well, Gordon, on that, I remember my dad would get me Commando comics, and you'd read about Britain in the Second World War, and it was the Englander and the German, and it was England, and there's a guy in a kilt with a gun, and he's called Jock, you know, and they're all it's all propagandized to make you think at that early age. I even at school, Gordon, I remember having I always said to my mates at school, it says made in England. My ruler was made in England. Made in Scotland one. Why can't we put a bit of wood and put markings on it and call it Scottish? Ingrained into us, ingrained. And this is why 60-year-olds and over are still hesitant to vote for independence, because they've come from that era where everyone was put on them. There was something colonised and they can't understand, they can't process it. They just feel British in their bones because it's everywhere. And the bagpipes that we mentioned earlier on, that's just a nice wee thing that's a cherry on top, but I'm British.
Yeah.
And that's the problem we've got. And that's where it starts from, Gordon. America, the UK, Scotland, airbrushed.
Well, the thing is, I don't know about you, Norrie, back in the 70s, I didn't mind seeing things that said made in England, things that said made in Scotland or made in Wales. That was fine. That didn't bother me. Still doesn't bother me. I'd actually rather see products bearing labels that say made in England or made in Scotland, because it acknowledges that England is a country. The manufacturers are now too scared to put that on their labeling and say made in England in case it offends the people who are British, who see themselves as British. And so they won't do it now. And there's this expectation, like with wearing red poppies, that if you don't do it, you're bad and you're going to be, regarded as beyond the pale. What a load of nonsense that is.
I know it is. But what I was saying, Gordon, is as a Scots lad, I was just a boy at school looking at this. Where's the Scottish one? That's all I was saying. Why do we have to import from England or Portugal or anywhere else? Why can't we make Scottish rulers? I don't mind nations being identified as what they are. But at that point, I thought, where's the Scottish one? Where's my Scottish one? That was all. But I take your point. It's not a made in UK thing that we're getting now, all over the place, And that includes us as well, because we're part of it.
You even see the brake lights on the back of a Mini in the shape of a bloody Union Jack. What is that all about? The Mini's designed in Britain. Its engine's made in Germany, for Christ's sake.
I know. It's another way of. You're right, Gordon. It's another way of trying to force us into thinking we're British again. Even the cars in front of you have got the flag. But one thing I've noticed in the Highlands, especially, Gordon, in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been no Union flags flying. It's almost like it's a nasty thing to fly. It's associated with Rangers Football Club, the British government. It's associated with things that are negative, and it's not getting flown anywhere. And I'm hard pushed. You used to find them in the Highlands all over the place. Mostly Tories would have them in their gardens and their crofts and stuff. Nothing now. Nothing.
Maybe put them up.
Well, I don't know. I think people don't want to put them out now. It's got a connotation of something that isn't there anymore.
Yeah, it's got unpleasant connotation. I mean, here in Glasgow, the only places that you'll see Union flags are on either Rangers football ground or its supporters, or on the British Legion and the branches of the British Legion. The only places you'll see it. You might sometimes see it above a city hall. More especially in Edinburgh, you'll see the Union flag flying above the Scottish Saltire.
Castle.
Reminder. Whereas in Glasgow, not so much. You're more likely to see a Saltire.
It's kind of.
People in Glasgow are largely pro-independence, and they were for a long, long time, and they were all the way through the referendum in 2014, and they still are. Over 60% of Glaswegians do not see themselves as British.
I know. It's incredible. There was a poll out not so long ago, 66% they estimated were for independence. And this is after Labour's made all the cuts and turned out to be like the Tories. It's turned a lot of people really against them and really coming out separatists.
That poll question had a caveat, which was if people believed that independence would provide a well-being economy, then they would 66% of them would support it.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing. So, if you attach the right kind of pledge to it, independence can mean different things to different people.
That's right.
But essentially, that would be possible. It would be perfectly possible for a new government to adopt a well-being economy straight away. And
Well,
I think the Scottish government has already said they want it, although they're unable to provide it at the moment.
At the moment, when is the right moment? But these polls, Gordon, you're right to identify the caveats put to them.
Yeah.
But in the past, this is how propaganda works again. If you question a poll and it comes out and says only 40% want independence, that's because you said independence, but it would be 25 years before Scotland's economy would come back to equilibrium. And you're like, oh, I don't want that. It's bad enough as it is. I don't want independence. Of course you would say that. But if you said 5 years it would take for Scotland to get its house in order, get our houses built, get these libertarians cleared off the land, back into the European Union, the Celtic nations have got a new forum made up, that could take months. That could be, and Scotland is in a place where you could only dream about. You could only dream about. You're now having a holiday home in Scotland because that land has been taken back. And another thing, Gordon, I will rejoice when I see that word estate out the Scottish history books, because estate means mine. It means mine. And there's estates all over Scotland. See, when they're chased off and when their debts, and they've got to pay their debts, whatever they are, and not getting government subsidies, I'd be a happy chappy, because they are taking over our land and they're selling our land to the highest bidder. It's not theirs to sell. Just because they got it because their great uncle killed a bishop. No, I'm sorry. That's not how a modern democracy works. I could kill you. Does that mean I get the land? It does. It's bizarre how the system works, Gordon. And we've got to, every time you see an estate, get angry, get really angry, because they're taking your land. That's our land. It's not theirs. And you can't get on it. You can't get near it because they've got deer and they've got all kinds of stuff going on there. And fish farms.
What you were saying about the time frame for becoming fully independent and back up and running as a country, it can be done in 5 years. Well, we also know, because the European Free Trade Association, which, if you join it, allows you to trade in and out of the EU, travel there and be educated there without being a member of the European Union. They said that if Scotland wanted to join EFTA, it could be arranged within months, not years. Not like full membership to the EU accession takes between 5 and 10 years to achieve, because they're so bureaucratic. But if you trade from outside, as a part of EFTA, as Switzerland is, incidentally, and Switzerland's right at the heart of Europe, remember, and they've been doing that for years, quite successfully. Look how wealthy they are. Vastly wealthy for the size of the population, Switzerland.
Gordon, you make a fantastic point, Gordon. This would be quite seamless. This would be easy, because they know Scotland. We're a close neighbour. We're a European country. Scotland's a European country. We'd be taken back in too sweet. Why? We've got water, we've got oil, we've got gas. We've got things we can sell to them. But more than what we get back. And by the way, we sell at our price, not somebody else's price for us. And so that money comes back into our system. And then we can go charge ahead for the transition into renewables or whatever we want to do. We can get free travel again across the European countries. And wouldn't it be great for... Here's the thing, Gordon. It's not a utopia, because before 2015, that's what we were living with. It's just returning to that. It's not a utopia.
Well, one thing, Nori, that we need to remember is that if we did, after becoming independent, if we joined EFTA and started trading with the European Union, there would be a massive rush of investors queuing up to put money into developing industries in Scotland, because England can't trade with Europe. Neither can Wales, neither can Northern Ireland, but we could. The Republic of Ireland can. We would be a perfect place for manufacturing to sell into Europe because nobody else in the UK could do it. And Scotland would have no trouble at all attracting investment straight into new industries, and we could control how those industries are regulated because we would have a government which could do that. And it would be up to us to elect politicians who would do that, take back control, bring back into public ownership all of these major utilities that we have and all these major natural resources which we can use to trade. It's so simple. It's not rocket science, and it makes perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense. But one of the things, Gordon, with these libertarians, get back to that model again, we're seeing farmers under this system being shortchanged, being taxed to the inheritance tax coming on them, so that means they can't pass it on to their offspring. And they're taking the easy option, and they're selling their land for housing because it's the only game in town. Remember, Gordon, these guys are not even getting half a penny for a pint of milk, and they produce the milk. Supermarkets don't even give them, and then we get cheap milk, but our farms go out of business, and then we're eating milk and oat milk. You don't get milk from oats. You don't get milk from almonds. You have to add things to it to get milk. And we're eating all this stuff because we can't get proper milk. We're in a dangerous place right now, and it's only dangerous because we're not taking action ourselves to people. And I guess the point of today's program, Gordon, is if you don't go out in the streets and you don't take action, you're going to get more and more and more of this. If you do go out in the streets and you do work towards a better Scotland, you will be rewarded beyond your dreams. It's that stark. You're going to get that shit show over there where you can work hard and get to the UN and finally get Scotland in its rightful place. That's the basis of today's show. It's the choices we've got, Gordon. I'm getting excited, I've got to say.
I'm just watching the time now. We've got about 3 minutes left on the clock here.
3 minutes.
There are so many things that we could continue to talk about, but what you're saying is correct. We would have the opportunity to get ourselves off the libertarian roundabout of constantly losing control to these international corporations and allowing them to decide what the country does and what it doesn't do. And this goes back to this issue that you raised of the constant boomeranging of the Flamingo Land application to build essentially a theme park and a holiday camp at the south end of Loch Lomond. And the only reason why it's coming back is because it looks attractive to our current government, which thinks it's the only way to get investment into that area. And the local authority will play along because they're being starved of funds by both the Scottish government, which is being starved of funds by the English government, forcing the neoliberal model to move in and take over. Once we have control over our own country again, we can centralize control over the land register. We can decide which people we allow to invest where and what sort of developments we want to see. And that can be down to local politicians, local democracy, to decide what that area actually wants to be built there, if anything, and whether it should be just left alone as a natural resource for the local people to enjoy. That would be up to them instead of being. Yeah.
We're getting messages from Bjorn's Iceland, and we've got somebody from India listening today as well. But I can't pronounce the name, I didn't write it down. So if you're that person from India that's made a comment, I'm very sorry, but the reach is getting there, Gordon. People want to hear more of this stuff away from political parties. And I think people like to hear grassroots stuff getting said, not political stuff.
Yeah, and I think you and I are able to do that because we're not politicians, we're not members of parties, and you and I both share a similar ambition for the country, which is to free it from all of these foreign interferences and this foreign government, this lack of funding, and the lack of control over everything that happens in our own country. It's so obvious that we're colonized. I don't know why people find a hard time accepting it.
You're right, Gordon. But once you know it, you can't unknow it. Listen, I know we're pressed for time. Can I do a selfless plug for the sports show in Caledon Radio tomorrow at 10:30? It is when this is the thing, Gordon. I want to tell people, we're always told not to mix politics with sport. See, at Caledon Radio, we do exactly that. We put sport into the politics and politics into the sport, so you can understand it, why things are going on. It's a good listen. 10:30 Caledon Radio. See you there.
Excellent.
Take it, Gordon.
I'm just thinking of that, so it's just run out of time, so I think we'll tie it up there. But thanks again, Nori, for as always interesting points and discussions, which hopefully the viewers of these programs find interesting, especially now that I know we've got viewers in Iceland and India and Canada and all across the globe. We hope more of you will tune in and also recommend the program to your friends.
Absolutely, Gordon. Look after yourself. Have a great weekend, Gordon. We'll catch up next week.
Okay, Nori. Bye for now. Good weekend to all of you.
Gordon.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Friday. Bye for now.
Bye-bye now.